Hello, everyone. Welcome to Outside the Studio. I am so honored to have Stephen Washington on the show with us. He's the author of Recovering You, Soul Care and Mindful Movement for Overcoming Addiction. And Stephen's also a former professional dancer. And so he's very highly acclaimed in the world of dance and Qigong and Pilates. And so I'm just so honored to have you on the show, Stephen, and I'm looking forward to talking about all things Recovering You. And in particular, there's many themes throughout your book, but I definitely want to talk about addiction and all of the things that come along with that, and certainly overcoming addiction and, recovering, healing. How are you today?
I'm well, thanks. Nice to be with you, Tessa. Lovely to meet you.
Yeah, likewise. Lovely to meet you as well. So I'd love to just have you, I guess, to kind of add on to my introduction of you, just so people can get a little bit more of a sense of who you are if they aren't familiar with your work already.
Well, I am Stephen Washington. I'm 51 years old. I was originally from the East Coast in Connecticut. Come from a small family and lived there until I sprouted my wings and went off to New York to study dance at NYU. And I became a professional dancer eventually. All the while, and we'll talk about this more in the hour, all the while there was a lot of dis-ease within me, a lot of unprocessed and unhealed trauma. And how I dealt with that was to drink, use drugs, smoke cigarettes, eat, anything to take myself out of myself in order to help me feel more comfortable in my skin and in the world. I managed to create a career in dance in New York that was very fulfilling. I was always working and I loved it. And dance is a perfect occupation. A dancer or an artist is a perfect occupation for someone with a drug or alcohol problem because there's always a time to celebrate. There's always a party, opening night party, a closing night party, and everything in between. And I did so for many years with little consequence, and then eventually I felt consequences for my addictions. And that's the thing about an addiction. It's when you have a behavior that you engage in, and despite the negative consequences, you continue to do it and you continue to repeat the behavior. And so I carried on with that until I couldn't anymore. And until an angel that entered my life, who was this beacon of hope and light, who shined the light of sobriety. And he wore sobriety like a beautiful loose garment, and he still does to this day. And he took me to my first recovery meeting. I was nervous to go to that recovery meeting, but when I walked in, I knew that I was in the right place because everybody in that room kind of looked like me. And they shared such intimate things about themselves that at first it took me aback, but then I was just so relieved to hear people be really real. About the joys and the sorrows and everything in between in life. And they laughed a lot. I love that there was so much laughter in the rooms, and that was really inspiring. And then there were these little posters on the wall that describe what the promises are, and that if you follow this program to the best of your ability, before you're halfway through, some of these promises will come true. And I just remember there was one that talked about, we will intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle us. And that just took my breath away, because I had been moving through life feeling like life came with an instruction manual and I didn't get it. And so
I love
was
that.
Thank you.
Say it again. We will intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle us.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Oh man. I mean, I think so. I'm curious what your opinion is. I think so many of us can relate to this. And I know you discuss this in the book in terms of like addiction, not necessarily having to be this thing that is, what is the word I'm looking for? It doesn't always have to be that thing that is so bad that we need to seek help in terms of like alcohol, drugs, things of that nature. But you talk about it in terms of a highly sensitive person, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about things that in our lives that give us low level anxiety. And that's kind of like this constant underlying undertone of how we live our lives. Or, those of us with trauma, whether it's what we think of as really hardcore trauma or just kind of like neglect or things that we're not paying attention to, habits and behaviors that don't serve us, but that we could all really use a book like this, that we could all really benefit from thinking about, finding a community that helps us laugh and find a community that helps us look at each other in a more humane way. And so I guess I'm not really asking a question in particular, but I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about that particular part of your book, about the highly sensitive people and how it's almost like you're saying, well, I'll let you tell me. What do you say?
Yeah. Let me first start off by saying that I am a highly sensitive person.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the things that was really challenging for me as a child, because there was so much turmoil and anxiety and so much trauma in my household with my family. And being the sensitive kid that I was, it was very difficult. And ways that I coped with it was to bite my nails or to rock myself to sleep or to pick my skin or eat obsessively. And that's what helped me to be in the world. That's also a time when I started to experiment with dance, because I would dance in the living room, and just twirling my body around in the living room to music helped me to self-regulate. Had no idea that I was self-regulating, had no idea that I was doing energy work with my body and my energy at that time. I was just intuitively led to that. But it's in large part because I'm such a sensitive person. And what I've discovered over the years of doing the work that I do at the level that I do it, I was introduced to the opportunity of teaching people who identify themselves as highly sensitive through my husband, Lee Harris, who is an energy intuitive. And he, for years, gave workshops and retreats and evening events. And I would bring a movement component to it, and I would teach Qigong. And what I discovered was that, well, first I discovered that it worked wonders for me in my own life. And so I knew that it would help other people. But I was able to get firsthand information and experience of sharing this with many different groups, thousands of people, help them to become more skillful at managing their own energy and giving them a tool that they could use to help themselves to self-regulate and to feel more comfortable in the world, and also to get to know their body in a different way. Many highly sensitive people, not all of us, but like a lot of us have had experience with trauma. And I love that we're talking about trauma, and that there is this national and international conversation about trauma, because there's certain ways in which we've often thought about trauma for the longest time. And now we understand that trauma doesn't necessarily mean going off to war or being a victim of a rape or being in a car accident or what have you. There's so many different ways that one can experience trauma, and that's been shown quite well in many different pieces of literature, like The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And right now I'm also reading a book about adverse childhood experiences and healing from that trauma. There's so many different things that we can all experience that are traumatic. And so we all have a connection to it, more so than we ever thought. And so I think that this work is instrumental, along with other practices too. I think that Qigong or any other mindful movement practice is a wonderful way to help people to get in touch with their body, because there is this tendency to disconnect from your body. So to take a moment to explore how your body feels as you move and as you breathe, and also to be aware of the emotions that you are experiencing at that time. There's often a tendency to disassociate from your own emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And so these practices that I teach help us to get in touch with our emotions and also to observe our thoughts. And there's an amazing quality to Qigong that helps us to energize, but yet relax the body at the same time, helps us to balance our emotions and also just calm the mind, calm that monkey mind that many of us have. So I think it's a practice, and this work can be beneficial to everyone, whether you consider yourself in recovery or not. We all need self-care tools, and that is the heart of what I do and what I bring to the world. Is I bring self-care tools to people who are open to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I want to go back to your own personal story again, and pull on that thread a little bit more in terms of an angel came into your life, took you to this first meeting, and then, I'm always curious about how that looks, that process of healing and recovery looks. And it's so nuanced and different for all of us, right? So this isn't to say that what worked for you will work for everyone, but I do want to know more about your origin story and that process of healing. So I'm wondering, after that first meeting, it sounds like it really resonated with you. During that time, what did your daily habits and behavior look like? And did they start to change immediately, or did it take a lot of ups and downs and starts and stops?
It took time. I mean, there were ups and downs. Of course, there was days where I felt as if the process was easy, and there are other days when I felt like I was pushing a boulder up a hill, because it takes a lot to usher change into your life. It takes a lot to admit that you don't have it all together. Yeah. That's a big one for me. I love for people to think that I have it all together. Yeah. And that's something I've had ever since I was a child, because I didn't want to be judged. Mm-hmm. And so when you enter recovery, a big part of that is asking for help and stepping outside of yourself and admitting to yourself first and then to another person that I don't have it all together. I don't have the answers. If I had the answers, I wouldn't be in the situation that I'm in now. I need your help. So it was very humbling. It was very humbling. And I'm so grateful that it was a friend that introduced me to recovery, and that he did it in a way that was never forceful. It was always just he was just being his beautiful self.
Well, so I'm curious about how that worked for you. I think about people in my life who I feel like could really benefit from a practice like Qigong or yoga or any kind of mindful movement or mindfulness practice. And, I always think you can't really force, of course, anyone to do anything that they're not ready for. Usually I kind of think, well, if they are ready, they're going to come to me and ask for my help. But this friend of yours sounds like he was able to invite you in a way that you were open to, and perhaps you were just ready and you didn't know it until he called it to your attention. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what he said and how that approach worked for you?
Well, the interesting thing was I was ready for it when I went to him and I approached him and led him and told him what was going on with me. And one of the first things that he said to me was this interesting story. So I was a dancer in The Lion King, and he and his partner came to see me perform one night, and they came backstage after the show. My friend Craig is in recovery. His partner is not. Mm-hmm. He said that his partner asked him later on, he asked him if I was okay, because he felt like normally my energy, there's a bright light about me, and it seemed like my light was turned way down. Mm-hmm. I, of course, didn't realize that I was emitting that. I thought I was giving off this energy and sense that everything was okay. But clearly, anyone who was astute enough would know that something was not right. And so that's one of the first things that Craig said to me when I admitted to him that there was something wrong. And that just took my breath away. And that was just more evidence that I could not deny what was happening to me and that I really needed to lean into it. And so I lent into it, and I went to my first meeting, and I really just kept going back. I tried to follow suggestions as much as I could and really just lean into it, because clearly he and others knew how to do this life thing without drugs and alcohol, and I didn't know how to do it, and I needed to find a way to learn how to do that. So in order to do that, I had to do what they did to the best of my ability. And some days that was easier than others. There were some days when I really wanted to drink, but I didn't. There's some days when I felt really triggered. At that time, I was dancing on Broadway, and a lot of my using was in and around the theater, in and around that environment. So much so that my castmates had bottles of liquor in the dressing room. Some of the crew, one of the crew members was a drug dealer and would regularly come to our dressing room. So I was trying desperately to change my life, but yet everything around me wasn't changing.
Yeah.
So I had to find a way to make peace with that and to take care of myself during that process. And so I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. And whenever things came up for me, what I tried to do as best as I could is to be honest about it and to share what was going on, because I heard very early on that we are only as sick as our secrets, and that a problem shared is a problem halved. And community is such an important part of all of our self-care and our well-being, and especially if you are someone who is dealing with addiction. So that's a little bit of what the process was like.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
You brought up a topic that I want to talk about in depth, and that is being triggered as it relates to anything that triggers us. I think of what sounds like you're describing as being around that environment where all of these things that you're addicted to are readily available. And that could be a trigger to, well, it's easy access to it, right? So it would be hard, I imagine, to make yourself stop between stimulus and reaction. So I always think about this ability to pause between stimulus and response and choose a reaction that will serve our higher good or serve our purpose in a healthier way. And so it's so hard to do, right? When we get triggered, it's so hard to do, to slow down and make that choice from a very conscious place. And, we could take it back to something that's even lower stakes, which is like just getting into an argument with somebody that you're close to, or feeling triggered by something a friend says to you. And then maybe not reacting in the way that you wish you would have in retrospect. So I guess I'm wondering, how is it even possible? And how do we do that, pausing and choosing mindfully?
It is possible. It is possible, but I think it takes practice. I think it takes awareness of your own body and of your own nervous system and of your own energy. It takes time to be able to identify, hey, I'm feeling triggered, and that might be that I feel something in my gut, or my heart starts to race, or maybe my face feels flushed, or my hands start to sweat, or whatever the things that happen to you when you feel triggered to have some big emotion or big reaction. So I think the first thing is awareness. And then also, I think in the practices that I share in the book, so much of it is about self-care and managing your own energy. So really being able to use practices like the breath to help self-regulate, and just being able to also look at the breath when you're in those moments. Because I think when we feel stressed out, something changes in the way that we breathe, right? Our breaths become very shallow, very short. So if we're able to get to ourselves to breathe deeply, that helps us to begin to self-regulate, so that we can turn off that part of the brain, the amygdala, that is that fight, flight, or freeze response that we have when we feel stressed, or when we feel as though we're under some sort of a threat or attack. And then we can somehow, through the breath and through some sort of self-regulation, get to the point where we could start to use other parts of our brain that allow us to use more thought and more reason and logic. So that's just one way to think about it and to look at this. I think about what I share in the book about coming up with a plan of action around triggers, around being triggered. And I use it in the context of alcohol or drugs, but you can really apply it to anything. For me, it was important for me to be very mindful of the situations that would trigger me. Like there were certain people that would trigger me, certain relationships would trigger me, certain environments would trigger me, certain emotions would trigger me. One of the things that I started to do was I started to assemble a list of people, list of phone numbers that I could call when I felt triggered. So that before I followed that feeling and acted out the way that I had so much experience doing, like, up until getting sober, anytime I had a feeling that I was uncomfortable with, I would run to whatever behavior, addictive behavior that could help me check out. And so I had to just invite other people into my life who could be that line of defense against picking up that first drink or drug. So that was really helpful for me. Even things like certain neighborhoods used to trigger me. I could walk through certain neighborhoods of New York City because I partied so much in those neighborhoods, and I didn't know if I would be able to walk down the street and not walk into that bar. There were times when I'd be on the subway and I would tell myself after work that I wasn't going to drink and I would just go directly to Brooklyn. But there were times when literally the doors would open at 23rd Street and I felt as though an arm reached into the train and grabbed me and pulled me out. And before I knew it, I was on a bar stool having a drink. My intention was not to do that. So yeah, it's just important to acknowledge that triggers are normal. They are part of recovery. Try not to beat yourself up for being triggered. We're all human. And it just takes time and practice to develop tools and strategies to deal with it. And that there is a way to feel triggered and not react in a way that puts us into more danger or harm.
Yeah. I'm kind of visualizing that pull of how you describe the subway doors open and feeling like an invisible hand pulled you, and then suddenly you find yourself seated on a bar stool. Is there, to me, that sounds like almost like trance, like kind of just, for lack of a better word, unconsciously being pulled in this direction by some sort of trance state, something that's operating below your line of awareness. And I wonder when you suddenly come to sitting there, maybe on a bar stool, perhaps already with a drink in your body or about to take a sip, what do you do in those moments? Or even after the fact, when you're like, oh man, I really wish I wouldn't have done that. What's the next step after that?
Well, I think in the middle of that process, it's never too late to stop and put the drink down, or to stop yourself from having another drink. It's never too late to do that. It's never too late to reach out to someone who can help you. Because clearly that is a moment of crying out, even though you're crying out to yourself, by yourself. And I also think that in this journey of addiction recovery, just the nature of addiction is that we are conditioned to do the same thing over and over again, and sometimes expecting to have a different result. Yeah. But we get the same result. Nothing changes. So even if you could have the thought while you're in the process of doing this thing that everything inside of you does not want to do this, that is progress.
Mm-hmm.
I consider that to be progress.
Mm-hmm.
And just paying attention to what that feels like, And one of the things I try to offer people in my work and in this book is hope that even if you have those moments, that there is a way out, that you're not alone. Many of us have experienced that, are experiencing that right now, or will experience that in the near future. And that there are many of us who've gone before who have found a way to find freedom from addiction, and that there is a possibility that you could find that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I do have a follow-up question about your plan of action, which I love. I when I was reading through the book and I saw that section, I was like, oh, this is so smart and so helpful, because oftentimes we don't get there. We think about, okay, what happens after the fact? How do you heal? But having a plan of action for when you get triggered is so, so key. And I love what you're saying about having a list of people ready to call. I'm wondering what you say. Did you have to plan, like, how detailed in this plan of action do you get? Do you feel like, I'm thinking about those of us who feel like, okay, well, even if I had a list of people to call, I was going to call them up. What would I even say?
The
You know
truth.
what I mean?
The truth. I'm sitting in a bar. I just ordered a drink. I haven't taken the sip yet, or I've taken a sip. I haven't had the whole thing. And I really don't want to be doing this right now, but I can't help myself.
Mm-hmm.
You tell the truth, which is sometimes easier said than done.
Yeah.
And sometimes we make mistakes and we mess up and we don't tell the whole truth. But like I said a moment ago, nothing changes if nothing changes. So the thing to say is just to say the truth, and to call someone that you know has your best interest at heart. Not everyone is meant to hold space for you in that way and receive that call.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I have a question. I'm curious about your opinion on childhood trauma, and because it seems to me that, as far as what I've read, and I'm curious what you have found on this too, that a lot of our addictive behaviors come out of our just wanting to keep ourselves safe during childhood, like their habits and behaviors, like you were talking about moving your body when you were a kid. Now, certainly that was a healthy way for you to process that trauma, but then there are other things that no longer serve us in adulthood. So I guess my question is, in your research, in your work, how important is it, do you think, to go back and revisit that childhood trauma and understand what happened and how you were traumatized and by whom and when?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you for asking it. I think, and I can only speak from my own experience.
Sure.
Okay. And I've been on this journey of understanding trauma for the last several years. And I've been in counseling for many, many years. My first time with a counselor was at the age of 15, because I just felt like I needed some help, and I thought that my family was batshit crazy and I needed some support. But never in my years of therapy had I ever had a therapist that I remember acknowledging that what I'd experienced in life was traumatic, that my upbringing was traumatic, that these things that happened were early trauma. And that just blew me away. It blew me away. I think it is important to go back and revisit that stuff with someone who is qualified and skillful at helping us navigate old memories and experiences, helping us to tune into what's happening in our body at the moment when we recall those things, and then giving us tools and practices that can help support us going forward, so that we aren't living a life where we're constantly triggered by old traumas, that help us get past it, help us get to integrate it. Really, integration is so important, and help us to move forward. That's the work that I'm doing now, and I suppose I'll be doing some version of that work for the rest of my life. It's so impactful. At the time when most of us experience childhood trauma, where our bodies and our minds are still just developing, our brains are still developing, and it's such a important time. And those traumatic experiences affect our physiology and our brains and our minds. And so it's so vital that we pay attention to that. And like I said, I love that we're having this conversation. I love that we're having this conversation around the globe about it, because it's important. And I think that ACE study says it all, that I think there were 25,000 people who were asked to be a part of the study, and 17,000 people said yes to being a part of the study, and just recalling, sharing about their experiences growing up, whether their parents had gotten a divorce, or whether there was abuse or drug abuse, mental illness. Did anyone ever demean them? Did they ever witness violence? So many different things that I just thought were just a part of life. I didn't realize that they were trauma. And when I took my ACE test, I scored an 8. 8 out of 10.
Yeah.
And many of us, many people out there will score just as high, or will score a little bit lower, but it doesn't matter exactly what your score. If you're anywhere on that spectrum, there are consequences to it. And now we're discovering also physical consequences in terms of just physical health, not even just mental health.
Yeah. I had the same experience taking the ACE, and it was just so enlightening to understand what we're talking about when we say trauma, because I had the same reaction of, who am I to complain? I'm a privileged person, grew up in a middle-class family, had both of my parents in my household at all times, but there was mental illness, there was neglect, and there was instability in terms of emotional regulation. And so when we look up to our parents in terms of learning how to behave as adults, and they're modeling behavior that's unhelpful or not very adult, and I use that in quotes, because any of us really fully functional adults? I mean, certainly we're working towards it, right? But we oftentimes, so many of us just don't have models for what that looks like. And then we model after their behavior. And, my parents did the best they could with what they had. I know that to be absolutely true. And it wasn't enough. It just wasn't. And so that's why this is so important. I want to ask you about the work that you do in terms of teaching Qigong and the use of Pilates in terms of integrating emotion.
One of the reasons why I brought those two together is because they complement each other really well, the Pilates and the Qigong, because they're both connected to movement and breath. Breath is very important. And in terms of when it comes to the integration of emotions, like I said a moment ago, we can tell a lot about how we're feeling by how we're breathing. So these practices help us to pay attention to our breath, to coordinate our movements with our breath, and to move the body with awareness. And just doing that allows us to turn on parts of our system that will release these feel-good hormones that help us to uplift our moods. So it has the ability to shift us from perhaps anxiety or sadness to lighter emotions, and it helps to bring about a sense of presence. Two, I think when it comes to those practices, they bring you into the present moment because you're paying attention to your body in the moment and the sensations that you feel in the moment. And both Pilates and Qigong are very much about the details. It's really important, as opposed to other forms of movement and exercise where you can just sort of mindlessly do it.
Yeah.
They require your attention and your to details. And that helps bring us into the present moment. And I think one of the things that's tricky for many of us is that we're drawn to other places besides the present moment. We're drawn to the past. We're looking at the past and we're staring at it, and we're often staring at it with regret and shame and remorse. Or we're looking to the future. And it's not always looking towards the future with a sense of hope and lightness and possibility. Oftentimes it's with dread and worry and anxiety. So these practices help to bring us into the present moment, because this is where we really have influence and power, is in the present moment, in terms of how we feel in our body and how we react and respond to the world around us.
Yeah. So before we started to record, you mentioned your membership community. Is that related to this work? Is that something different? Would you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think about the practices that I teach in the book as like a blueprint or a roadmap to building self-care practices. And I think that we all need self-care. It's something that most of us don't do enough of. And one of the most important things about self-care is to be consistent with it. So I try to help people to build self-care practices because it's what's going to help support recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I offer in my online membership community, the SWE Studio, where I blend Pilates and Qigong in my signature class, but I also offer meditation and laughter medicine, as well as dance classes, because I think that it's important to have practices that we can continue to use over a period of time. And I really wanted to create a library of wellness content that was accessible and affordable. One of the great things about Pilates and Qigong is that they're both very highly adaptable. So I have people in my community who are as young as 20 something and as old as 80 something. Mm-hmm. And there's something in it for everyone. I have full length classes. I also have abbreviated classes because we don't all have an hour's worth of time to devote to a self-care practice. Sometimes we only have 20 or 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. And I just try to inspire people, uplift people, and to give them tools to help them live a more conscious and joyous life through movement.
Mm-hmm. So you said SWE?
SWE, Stephen Washington Experience.
Okay. I was like, it has to be his initials, but what does the E stand for? Very cool. I like that. So I've heard of a little bit about laughter medicine. I've never actually experienced it myself. Mm-hmm. If anyone's also curious about that, could you just explain it a little bit?
Yeah, laughter medicine or laughter yoga is just a practice of incorporating laughter with movement and with breath. I was first introduced to it when I first moved to California back in 2011. I was at a church, and the pastor leading the service invited us all to laugh for a couple of minutes. Mm-hmm. And that was the strangest thing. She just started laughing, and then the rest of us started laughing. And then the next thing we know, I was laughing even more because I was laughing and other people were laughing, and I felt incredible. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing about laughter medicine. It's one of those practices that benefits the body. There's so many benefits in terms of lowering your stress, improving digestion, helping to self-regulate your nervous system, improving cardiovascular health, so many things. But it also turns on that switch in your body to release those feel-good hormones that are really important, right? Mm-hmm. Turns off that fight, flight, freeze, our sympathetic nervous system that releases cortisol, that stress hormone that's really useful when we're in danger. But many of us, it's overly, we're oversensitized, and it's releasing even when we don't really need it. And that has its ramifications on our health as well. So laughter medicine is just a simple practice of just laughing, just for the sake of laughing, just for the sake of laughing. We all need a little bit more joy and laughter in our lives.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. I was I'm starting to feel a little giggly myself just hearing you talk about it.
Do you want to laugh for a minute with me?
Sure.
Yeah. So I'll just start laughing and then see if you're inspired to laugh with me.
Okay. So,
Take a deep breath with me and release the breath out. And again, take another breath in and release it out. And one more breath. One of the interesting things I've learned from incorporating laughter into my classes and workshops is that not everyone is comfortable laughing.
yeah.
Laughter is hard for many of us.
Mm-hmm.
So I always encourage people to, if they can't laugh, to maybe just lift the corners of their mouth and smile, even if they can't get themselves to laugh.
Do you think it's important for the sound, like the sound of laughter to come out?
Well, I think that I'm sure there are some physiological benefits just in terms of what it does, because I talk about how it improves digestion. When you have this contraction in your belly from laughing, that helps to assist peristalsis, which is that movement through the intestines of our waist. But I think there's so many muscles in the face that when they are activated, that affects the brain. So you can still get the same chemical release from smiling as you would from laughing.
Yeah.
So I always encourage people to just start from where they are and to not be hard on themselves if they have difficulty laughing and expressing laughter and joy in that way. Just take it as an opportunity to learn more about yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was really cool. It was interesting to watch myself react to that, because it was hard for me to laugh, which you could probably tell. But that was cool. Thank you. I appreciate that. I think I find myself at one of my self-protection mechanisms is to become very stoic and serious and not show emotion. And so laughter, especially laughing out loud, is challenging. But I'll do it in like the most awkward, inappropriate times uncontrollably, which is, I don't know what that's about, but
I think it's great to know that about yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's great to know that about yourself.
It's interesting, right?
Yeah.
So I have one more question on the path to recovery. And wherever we're talking about things like healing from trauma and addiction, I'm always curious about this. Do you think, and I know this is going to be a nuance in this, but I'm curious about what you think about hitting rock bottom in terms of your ability to acknowledge and recognize and then make a change that is sustainable. Do you think that you have to hit rock bottom in order to let go of an addiction or heal from addiction or heal from trauma?
Or just change, basically. Here's what I can say about that. Everyone's bottom is different. Everyone's point that they get to when they just can't go another step further with it is different. So one person reaching the ultimate bottom is no less significant than someone who had some sort of an awakening long before they ever got to that point. My bottom didn't look like a lot of people's bottom that I went to meetings with, and for a while I didn't know what to do with that. I thought, oh wow, am I really an alcoholic? Am I really a drug addict? Maybe I'm not as bad as I thought. And then I had to come to realize that my story is my story, and my pain is my pain, and it was uncomfortable enough for me to not want to go on another day like that. It was hard for me to think about going on another day like that, but it was also hard for me to think about not doing what I'd always done as well. So it's a really strange, interesting place to be. Yeah. But everyone is different. Everyone is different. So it doesn't have to end up. I mean, oftentimes in recovery, we always, they say, they mention jails, institutions, and death as like the ultimate consequences and in terms of a rock bottom, but it doesn't have to get to jails, institutions, and death before you make a change, no matter what it is that you're dealing with, because those addictions that I've been talking about that I have experience with are just as damaging as someone's addiction to work, where they have no sense of balance and they work themselves to death until they have a nervous breakdown or their body breaks down from exhaustion, and or they develop other sicknesses in their body. Do you understand what I'm trying to get at? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I totally agree. It looks different for all of us. I like what you said about it being for you, knowing that you couldn't do that anymore. Like it became intolerable to live another day in that way. Yeah. Of course, I'm paraphrasing, but that's kind of takeaway there for me anyways.
My bottom was me looking at myself in the mirror day after day and not recognizing who I saw, and feeling shame about my behavior. My bottom was waking up in the morning, some mornings, and being disappointed that I actually woke up at all, because sometimes I just thought it would be so much easier if I just died in my sleep. It was stuff like that was bad enough for me to want something else for myself in my life.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. So I want to ask one more question, knowing that has it been about 20 years that you've been sober?
Yeah. Last July was 20 years. So I'm a little over 20 years of sobriety, but sometimes I feel weird about saying that number, because really it's about the day.
Yeah.
Because all that I did to get to 20 years of sobriety doesn't mean much if I'm not doing something for myself to keep me sober today. Because it doesn't necessarily mean that I can't pick up a drink even with 20 years of sobriety.
Sure. Yeah.
I just try to keep it in the day.
Yeah. Well, as it relates to that, though, I mean, this has been quite a journey for you. I'm sure you've learned many things about yourself and the world at large along the way. Is there anything that stands out as most poignant? And I know most poignant or like top one thing is always so hard to come up with, but anything that's top of mind?
About sobriety, about
any of this in terms of your recovery, your journey to where you are right now.
Well, I think what I think is really important for me to remember, and for everyone within the sound of my voice to remember, is that no matter what you're going through, you're not alone. That myself and each and every one of us is worthy of transformation, change, and recovery, and that there are tools and there are practices that one can do to help us live better lives. And that's what I try to bring to the world with what I do. But those are the things that I would love people to know. as we wrap up this beautiful interview.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Tessa.
Well, so my final question is the administrative one of telling us how we can connect with you and follow along with you.
Yes. So my website is stephenwashingtonexperience.com. And there you will see everything that I do, the work that I do. You'll see anyone who goes to my beautiful site will go, and you'll see that you can also purchase my book there, and all the links to the places that you can purchase it, as well as the audio book. There's also information about my studio, SWE Studio, and all that I offer. And then there are also links to all the social media platforms that I'm on as well, where I create a lot of free content out there. So it's there for any one of you to use in a way that feels good and seems fit for you. And yeah, that's basically it.
Thank you, Stephen. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you. I'm so grateful that I got to have this conversation with you today.
Same. Thank you, Tessa.
Everyone, that concludes another amazing episode of Outside the Studio. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you learned something new, maybe remembered something old, maybe felt inspired to apply something to your life. You can hear my dog in the background. She's doing a little happy dance. So Daisy enjoyed it. Anyhow, I wanted to just pop in here to wrap us up to say a couple of things. Number one, I have such an amazing team that helps me put these podcasts together. Without them, I wouldn't, be able to bring these amazing conversations to you. So thank you to my producer, my director of creative services, my sound editor, my engineer, Consistency Media. Don't know what I would do without you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And the amazing creation and artistic musical genius, Drew Lovern. Thank you so much for putting together this music specifically for Outside the Studio. So unique to the show, only place you're ever going to hear it is right here. Thanks, you guys. You make my world go round. Stay well, everyone. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, share on the socials, especially if it's a show that you think, hey, this could help somebody else. That's what this is all about, right? We're sharing information so that we're better, so that we're inspired, so that we're lifting each other up, and we're learning how to be in this world, living on this planet to the best of our ability, sharing information and inspiring one another. And that's my hope. That's my hope for the show. Take care.